another reference. Actually, since we're also supposed to be talking about angels tonight as well.
Are we? Like as I said earlier, everything I know about angels came from the prophecy movies. So if you want to talk about Christopher Walken, I'm all.
We can do that.
I'm all for it.
I did grow up in a Catholic house. Well, let me rephrase. Majority of my family is Catholic. Me and my mom are not. And I was essentially raised from the broom closet, as it were. But I still had plenty of Catholic influences and some Jewish influences as well. Not so much.
Guilt from both sides.
Yeah. So one of the things that I actually found out recently, simply because I never saw my grandmother praying all that often, and she did this shortly after my grandfather had passed last year. She was trying to find this one picture, and she's like, I'm gonna pray to it was either Michael or Saint Anthony, one of the two. But apparently you pray to them, according to Catholics, you pray to them in order to find something that's lost.
Oh, yeah. I think, is that Michael? Is the lost items? I can't remember.
Something like that.
I know it's yeah, I think it is Michael. He's also like the patron saint of policemen and stuff like that.
Kind of. I've seen more to war in general.
Or was that Christopher? See, I don't know anything about angels. This is why I didn't want to talk about angels.
It was actually kind of funny because I was talking with my one sister about it, and she's like, well, the equivalent would also be as if you were praying to Hermes, a Greek legend as well. It is a similar concept. And she was able to find it. She found it the next day in the one box that she kept not looking in, and it was right there. And it's like,
of course,
yeah, and it happens, and that happens to everybody. But I think it was rather because she's not the big prayer in our family, at least not obviously so. That was my great grandmother, who her and her brothers came off the boat from Italy, essentially. So, and somewhere I have cousins in the Vatican, so we don't hear from them.
All right. Well, to anybody out there, usually Kevin does this at the half hour. I'm going to throw this out now because obviously we need desperate help, and if any audience members want to call in and talk to us or complain or ask questions or just ramble on, the number is 609-807-2492. Call or actually. We don't have the laptop out right now, so I can't see comments on Facebook. Oh, of course. we didn't get it ready. Okay. Beth has her phone out, so she might be able.
It sometimes screws up though.
So she might be able to see your comments on Facebook and respond. But anyway, so one of the reasons that we wanted you especially to be on here for this episode is you have said in the past you have had actual dealings with like what you believe are fae or and have some knowledge of. So talk about that, because the theoretical is all well and good, but obviously I pulled this stuff up off the internet, fairly quickly. Anybody out there can do the same. So that's not hugely interesting to talk about. I just wanted to lay down some background, but talk about some of your experiences and the practical end of it.
Okay, so my interactions that are directly with fae. Well, to anybody who is familiar with fae, there's a couple of key rules. One is don't accept anything. Don't just randomly pick something up, especially if you are not one of them, because it can be taken as stealing. This becomes important. And let's see, stay on the path. And oh yes, if you come back once, someone's looking out for you. Or if you come back once, it's a coincidence. Clearly they didn't want you that bad. Come back twice.
Now you're saying come back from. You might want to specify, because some people
if you come back from the Feylands, if you find yourself in the Feylands and you end up coming back to our world.
Okay, so that is someplace that you can travel to.
Sort of, yes. It's more like an astral projection sort of thing.
Okay. So you think it's not a physical, it's more of a mental.
While you're there, it's very much might as well be as hard as like you or this table.
Oh, okay. So it feels completely real. You know, when you.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I've seen like there's a guy on Facebook, not on Facebook. Yeah, well, he was on Facebook and YouTube. Talking about it. I didn't get his name, and I should have actually, especially for this thing, I was going to see if I could contact him. But he's got this whole video series about visiting the Fey lands and having spoken to fairies, and he brings back messages from them, and like says, you know, like this king that he met there.
Yeah, no, they still have their monarchies in place. That's not going away anytime soon. But a lot
so
of
that
them,
sounds legit to you.
Yeah, no, that's and
Okay.
they also have like the little mayoral towns and everything else like
Oh, wow.
we do here. Yeah, no, they're not the folksy little people that we grew up with our watered down fairy stories. They're actually some of them are able to traverse over. Case in point, leprechauns are actually able to come around. They do sometimes visit in certain areas, mostly in Ireland, of course.
Yeah. So what's the real deal with leprechauns? Because obviously that story has been like, you know, ripped apart and bastardized and turned into this silly thing of short guys with beards and funny hats and pots of gold. And I don't think the reality is probably anything. There was a very interesting take on them in American Gods, which I found pretty cool. That's a good show.
I haven't seen American Gods, so I wouldn't be able to tell you what the comparisons are there.
Well, there you go. So tell me what you know of as the reality of leprechauns, and I'm curious to see how.
So I
how
myself
right
haven't
they got
actually encountered a leprechaun. When it comes to leprechauns, what's actually this is actually legitimate. There is actually they are actually considered an endangered species in a part of Ireland.
Don't shoot the leprechauns.
And it's
Whatever
actually
you do, man.
and it's also to preserve the lands that they live in.
Okay.
The background of the leprechaun is there's essentially two schools of thought on what the name itself means. In one region, it means a little body, specifically referring to water. In another form of Gaelic, or another point in time in that particular strain of Gaelic, it also meant shoemaker, which is why you often see them, you know, cobbling.
Okay, yeah, because I've heard of them like brownies and
brownies are a separate.
and stuff.
Brownies are a separate thing. Brownies typically get to be a little more mischievous, but it's usually in good nature. They don't, unless you specifically piss them off, they're not going to be overly malicious. They may have a mean-spirited joke or something. Just
make little pranks and stuff.
Yeah, they're mostly tricksters. And the thing is, with the leprechaun, they're more of a they're essentially a walking parable, as it were, because any legend that you hear about that involves a leprechaun, 9 times out of 10, somebody's trying to trick them into giving them the pot of gold that's at the end of the rainbow. Or you're trying to get their 3 wishes out of them, which if you capture them, take a trinket of theirs, something that they hold dear, releasing them or that item back to the person is supposed to get you 3 wishes. And it's supposed to be the moral of the story at the end, because it always comes about in the worst way, is don't try to take the quick way to get what you want. You have to work for it. Because he certainly worked hard to get what he needs. You know, and he has every right to, when, you know, you get the 3 wishes from him, that, you know, or if you get his gold, that it's not going to be in the best of ways possible.
Yeah.
Which also comes to when you're making a deal with the Fae.
Oh, we got a phone call.
Ooh.
Hello, who's this?
It's Kevin.
I knew it.
Hey, Kevin.
We had a
Hey,
feeling
guys.
you'd be calling in. Hello.
I had to call in and correct at least one screw up you guys made.
Which one?
So you guys are doing fine with the fairy stuff? Although, Brian, you're literally reading off of notes. Not the best thing to do.
Just a little bit, like I said, to make sure I get the because I can't remember these
I
words.
know.
He didn't have time to outline.
Yeah,
It's okay.
I can't remember these words the way you do.
I believe, by the way, it's Tuatha De Dan.
Okay. See,
I
I knew
may be wrong.
I knew there'd be some kind of weird pronunciation because Gaelic doesn't sound the way it looks, and I had no idea
In
what
no
the
form,
correct.
and there's like 6 forms of Gaelic, and
Yeah.
additionally, there's
Yeah.
depending on how, and because it's not the way like we read it, where as you're going from the left. No, you have to start from the end and go to the front. So there's actually, and my sister actually had to research this for an Irish name. It's like there's a name that's like 13 to 14 characters long, but it's literally pronounced Shay.
Also, guys, Michael is the patron saint of police officers, paramedics, EMTs, exorcists.
Okay. So I was right about that.
Yes.
I couldn't remember.
Anthony is the patron saint of lost sight objects. Christopher is the patron saint of children. Although Christopher is not actually a saint anymore.
Oh.
Pretty much he never
Him
existed.
and Pluto are over in the corner consoling each other.
Well, funny enough, there's at least some evidence to suggest the stories of Christopher were based on the Greek god Hermes.
It makes sense.
On a lot of different fronts.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be the
awesome.
first. It wouldn't be the first time that a pagan legend or story was turned into a Christian.
That's for a majority.
Case in point,
of
you're
the-
talking about the goddess Bridget. Or Bridget, she's also the saint, is now Saint Bridget.
Hmm.
Although, again, the Catholic Church defense went, yeah, these saints are not actually people. They're not saints anymore.
Well, that's. I mean, I guess that makes sense. If you're going to have rules for sainthood, and you find out that some of these supposed people never actually existed, you kind of have to put the foot down. All right.
Granted, there are 4 saints, and Michael's one of them that aren't people. Because the full title would be Saint Michael the Archangel.
Right. Well, yeah, I guess he gets
Gabriel,
an exception.
Raphael, and Uriel are all saints, but none of them were ever people.
Right.
At
Okay,
least in Catholic lore.
so what's your take on the angel fae connection, the Christian mythology? Since now we do have you, and I couldn't really speak to any
You
of
did
that.
okay. You did actually pretty well on that. Usually, there's a couple of theories. One is that they're the unbaptized dead before Christianity came to Ireland. Another is that they are.
Well, of course, that's what they
elementals.
would say. Come on.
I'm sorry, the Irish person in the
And
room
then there's
is
the one that you were
falling.
alluding to. There's a theory that when Lucifer rebelled and there was a war in heaven, which you should at least have some idea of from prophecy.
A little
The
bit.
first war, not the second war, which the movie made up.
Yeah.
But part of a group of angels said no. They refused to side with God. They refused to side with Satan. So they were kicked out, but they weren't kicked into hell because they hadn't done anything wrong. They just wouldn't fight. So they were sent to Earth, and they created their own realm, which is fairy.
Oh, there we go.
Personally, I don't know which theory is true, but interestingly enough, Dante mentions the angels that wouldn't take sides. They're in the first circle of hell. The whole thing with the undecided in life have to chase banners, and the angels are carrying the banners or something like that.
Yeah, Dante had quite an imagination, but lots of fun stuff. So how are you feeling? Any better?
Getting better.
All right, good.
Still pretty miserable. I'll be up for it next week, but
Cool.
Well, that's one
you
way to
guys
go.
aren't doing too badly.
No, well, that's good. Yeah, we can try.
I'm listening, and I just had to call in and do a little heckling.
Oh, I figured. We knew you were going to call in. There was nothing on earth that could stop you. So
It was just a matter of when.
yeah, but that's what I was prepared for. I figured, all right, we'll get our nonsense out of the way first, and then eventually Kevin
Wait,
will
you mean
call
you were
in.
done? The show still has like another,
Yeah, I'm good. I'm pretty much just going to sit here for the rest of the show. You're on. You and Kevin
Since
can
I'm
take
here,
it from here.
and I know the most about it, I want to let everybody know real quick we're having a guest next week, which is Bishop Lainey Peterson of the Gnostic Church.
Oh, cool.
Yes. Very nice lady. I've worked with her before. She knows what she's talking about. She knows what she's doing. Should be a good interview.
Cool. So what is the Gnostic? What's the difference there?
It's the sort of thing that's going to take too long for me to explain, and I think it would be better for her to explain it.
All right, I'll ask
within
next week.
Christianity.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we
Sort
can get
of.
all that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll ask that next week then. All right.
Yeah, like I said, let the expert talk about it instead of me.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so
Okay. I'm going to let you go so I can lay back down. I will be listening.
all right, it was good to hear from you.
Okay.
Feel better.
Yep. Have fun.
All right, so Back to tell us about some of your you were going on before we tangented again to some of your experiences and knowledge with the Fae, because I think that's the most interesting thing, is hearing somebody's firsthand account that actually, you know, had things happen, to get an idea of what the reality is versus what, because with the tales and the folklore, they've been changed and they've been retold so many times that we probably don't have anything very close to the original anymore.
Oh yeah, trying to look up anything about a specific Fae type, it's usually really watered down and very subject to interpretation. It's the same as if you were trying to look up a specific kami in Japan, or a Duma in, for Hindu Buddhism,
Or
anything
vampires, even.
Yeah, everybody's got their own flavor of something.
Yeah.
As far as my own experiences with the Fae directly, I've been to the Faelands a couple of times. Not willingly, and by not willingly, not knowingly.
So
Consent is important.
Yeah, describe that. Because that's something interesting.
So the first time was several years ago. I didn't realize what exactly was going on, and there was this great house, and there was a party of some kind. I had no idea what was going on, or rather, I can't recollect, because again, it was so many years ago, and I didn't realize what actually happened. About 5 years ago, and I always have something like this happen around the same exact time, maybe a couple years apart. I was in that area again, and there was this huge celebration going on. And like I said, they're not as like backwards, cottagey, at least not in all parts. Some of them are a lot more modernized. Like, they actually had lockers, like we had in high school at one point. They actually have some of our instruments. They can adapt. They do have these things, especially since they're very prone to various arts and things like that. Now, in that particular instance, I had to go get something. I forget what it was. And I actually went to one of these lockers. And something fell out, which was apparently an artifact of theirs, or something of theirs that had gone missing, but they hadn't realized it was missing yet. And it falls into my hands, because it was in the thing that I was looking into. And because it fell into my hands, an alarm got raised. So I had to book it. So I'm running along, and when I had mentioned before, one of the rules of being in the Faelands is stay on the path. Just because you can see a path doesn't mean that's the actual path. If you know your... And I got back to where, at some point, that house was. And it was in ruin. I don't know what happened. I got into the ruins, it rebuilt up around me, just as those that were chasing me came to the door. And it blocked them just before they were able to get to me, and I was able to push myself back out before actually staying around to explain everything, which actually would have been the smarter decision on my part, but again, I had no idea what the hell was actually going on, pardon my language. And one of them thought it would be a good idea to follow me back. And because I have done energy work and whatnot, and these things are on a energy field, essentially, energy plane, as it was, I pretty much blocked it, told it to go back to its masters, and tell them to leave me the hell alone.
Yeah.
Which didn't bode well. And the only reason I know that it wasn't a dream overall, that cause sometimes you have those really vivid things.
Yeah.
Is because it was about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And my grandparents were downstairs because they were early risers. And I heard something bang against the door to my room. And then it opened, and I heard something shuffling. And then I heard somebody coming up the steps. And I asked my grandmother, because that was who was coming up, I'm like, were you already up here? Did you stop halfway downstairs? She's like, no, this is the first time I've come up this morning. And there's no pets or anything at my grandparents' house. So it's like, oh, lovely. And then I started having the most unusual strain of bad luck, all within less than 12 hours. Went to a priestess I know, and when I told her what happened, all she could do was facepalm and pretty much told me that because whatever I had was of such great value, they had called essentially a hunt on me. So she was able to block, and it was essentially waited out until they got distracted, which took the better part of a year.
You couldn't like return the thing, or
I do not traverse there specifically because I know I'm going to get myself in trouble. Because you know me, and people that have heard me on the show before know how trolly I can be. You can't get that mouthy with the Fae. Because they're very, their reactions, like you can be a particular type of Fae that's usually good for like jokes and being sarcastic, but a lot of them only like it when they do it. You try giving it in return, 9 times out of 10 you're also going to be supremely outmatched in wit to begin with. If you're able to get one up over on them and you do it too many times, not allowed. That's my dealings of actually being there. Staying in the physical realm here, however, there's a particular fae that everybody is familiar with called the Banshee.
yeah, it's a Irish legend of a wailing woman that foretells death.
It foretells death. It also, and that's all she really does. And that is her main thing. It's essentially to give the warning that there will be a passing. It is meant to prepare you. So this way, when the time comes, and they also can travel fairly far. And typically, they'll go to the further reaching families, wail, and the way that it translates to me is you get an impression of who when you hear it. And the closer you are and the closer that time is, you'll hear it far sooner to that person. About, I would say, a little over 2 years ago, I actually heard one. I knew who it was for, but it's also a matter of most Fae, even though they, society-wise, as far as I have seen, are essentially up to, say, our tech base, or at least our construction base and things like that. Again, they're not like, little off-thatched cottages in the woods or anything like that. It's not some weird Munchkin land sort of deal. A lot of their energies, though, mainly work better in more rural areas. So you have a better chance of getting an influence in, say, outskirts of suburbia into like farmland area than you would in the middle of a major city. A lot of them,
they have some sort of a tie to the land.
Yeah, they do have.
Like, it seems like they have some connection with elementals
and with everything that's been put on top of it, even if it's only a physical thing, it still has an energy of its own that can deflect and can keep them from drawing from. So I was actually in the hospital with my grandfather. This is more than 6 months before he passed when I had heard it. And it's not so much as an actual, at least in my experience, a keening that I heard, but it was more of an inflection and a pressure of what was going on. We were actually in there for my grandfather's breathing issues at the time. And I'm just in there going, oh no. I know that sound. And that's all they really do. They are not able to, for example, you can't contact, say, a banshee and try to get them to tell you where somebody went, whether they were judged, or anything like that. And that's just how it stands. Additionally, when it comes to the banshee, the original legends were that they were only tied to certain families. And some legends have it that they essentially sort of faded out because people were marrying outside of the main branches and things like that, because, let's face it, nobody wins in incest with the royals and whatnot of any society. And then the other strain of thought, which is the one that I subscribe to, is that because they were married, that the people here were getting married to outside families and such, it would essentially spread out how far a banshee could influence. So as you can imagine, they're fairly busy.
Yeah.
on a regular basis.
Well, it would make sense. I mean, if this happened to every Irish family everywhere, it would be much more common. At least it'd be much more talked about. It'd be much more commonly believed than as some, kind of old superstition, which is how it tends to be thought of now. I mean, I've never encountered anything like that, but then again, my family's not pure Irish. I mean, I've got all kinds of stuff in
Well, neither am I,
my
because
family.
I'm German, Scottish, Irish, English, and Italian.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it also goes back to, is there still enough of a connection back to those? Like logically speaking, how much of a connection does your bloodline still have back to that family? How much, outmixing and whatnot? Or is there essentially a certain mark that you would have as somebody of Irish descent, things like that? So there's a lot of open speculation. It's not really looked into that much. These are just like some of my speculations on that particular strand of thought, because that one actually makes a lot more sense in that regard, and it was actually the basis of a project I was working on that actually happened to be focusing around banshees. Because even a certain Fey Legends show, before essentially the veil went up, they interacted just like you and I would interact with humans.
Yeah.
And it's like,
well, like I said, I know from my vampire research where it sort of blurred over. There's the term banshee is actually Scottish, even though the thing is mostly thought of as Irish. The word apparently comes from Scottish. And there's a Leananshee or Leonshee that is Welsh Irish, and yeah, that has more in common with vampires, where they were sometimes muses who would inspire artists and kind of work them to death and feed off of their passion, and others where they were women, beautiful women that would lure travelers into their cottages and basically kill them and drink their blood and eat them.
well, the Leonshi has a lot more similarities with Selkies, which were these types of fey creatures that, when they were in the oceans, they were seals, but at night they would come out onto the land, take off their skin. They were beautiful women.
Yeah. Kind of like the original version of mermaids, which before Disney got a hold of them, mermaids were vicious little bitches. They would basically lure sailors, to crash onto rocks and come into the water where they would drown and be eaten, and they were nasty.
But as far as your reference to the Scottish, the spellings, while they're similar, are two separate things. For Irish, banshee,
it's a type of
banshee, yeah.
creature
Well, for the Irish, it's essentially just a keening woman.
Right.
However, over in Scotland, what you have is the little washer at the fen,
Yes.
who is usually an older woman who is all gnarled and bent, and she's washing clothes, usually a shirt. And if you come across her, she will hold, and if you ask her what she's washing, and she'll be like, your death clothes. There's only, you can either try going in the other direction to avoid it. However, there was one little trick which apparently you have to be very brave to do, because of the way that they said it's very rare somebody would actually do this, because her covering is essentially open. If you are brave enough to go up and suck at her teat, you are considered one of her children, and she will protect you. Which
gotta love those old legends.
Well, at that point, you're considered one of her children, so it's like a mother's love.
There you go.
At that point, which I wouldn't be surprised if they sort of use as a weird reference in Ernest and the Troll or something. That Halloween movie, you know which one I'm talking about.
No, I thankfully I don't. I kind of I stopped at the first Ernest movie. That was enough for me, and Ernest Goes to Camp. Saw it, was mildly amused by it, said, no, I don't think I need to see any of these others.
Basic
these
cable
other
for the win on that
sequels.
one.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Um,
Oh my God, they're as bad as the Medea movies.
Actually, what's interesting is as much as a lot of people have, everybody knows that that you have the incubus and the succubus as far as demons or specters and whatnot, and then like as a cousin to the incubus, you have the Alp over in Germany.
Yes, which we talked about with its funny hat and its penchant for sucking on toes and drinking breast milk. These are all fun things. The Germans are strange people.
Name one type of people that isn't strange.
Well, that's true. I guess you go back in our mythology, and we're all kind of screwed up.
But the thing is, like, if you compare the incubus to the succubus, right? The succubus 9 times out of 10, when they are portrayed, are these gorgeous women and everything else. 9 times out of 10, and that's how they stay, regardless of what's going on. See a particular X-Files episode, as one example. But when it comes to incubus, or incubi in general, they're not usually given the greatest of displays. It's very rare that they're actually portrayed as somebody who has that charm and everything like that. They're usually made to be fairly ugly, but there is actually I forget what the name is off the top of my head.
Reminds me, there was actually a great episode of there's a show I watched called The Magicians, which I'm just going to shamelessly plug because it's awesome. But that probably some of the best uses of like folklore and mythology and the way they handle things, because it weaves in, like they use all kinds of stuff. They had an episode where they had to go to an incubus and get like help from him, and the guy's like a stock trader, and
Makes sense.
he's telling them, he tells them no, he's like that's a stereotype. He's like, I don't even like sex, he said stress is a much better thing for me, so that's what I feed on, and it's like. And it was funny the way it was, just this like typical kind of Wall Street guy in the suit and whatnot, and they wind up.
So they were talking to Scaramucci?
Almost. Yeah, kind of like that, but like Gordon Gekko, as an incubus. It was really fun. I mean, the show is great. They had Bacchus on there. They had to go find him, and he was just the biggest bro. Like that's how they portray. He was just this 20-something looking,
Right.
party boy, and just it was hilarious and it was so well done. But again, good show to watch. But they bring in a lot of this stuff, and it just reminded me that this is one instance where they did actually portray the incubus in kind of a.
Actually, it's really hilarious watching shows like that, or Supernatural, because Supernatural doesn't get all of it right.
No, but they do have fun.
They do try. Like they'll pull in some like obscure, and I mean obscure, figures. Like in season 1, they pull out Yaksha or Rakshasa.
Yes.
Which
good stuff.
It was a good episode, but it's like I'm saying, I don't recall anything about bronze. And it's a very obscure reference in and of itself.
They may have pulled something out of some legend somewhere, or just made it up.
Well, no, even with that, the legends that do mention bronze don't actually say that it will actually kill them. It's just that it has an effect. That doesn't mean it's a negative effect on them, or whether it powers
like it.
Or it could just boost them. They may get power from it. It's not actually clear. And then there's later episodes where they actually go with the Fae, which is also like Kevin's favorite theory, that a lot of the UFO sightings are actually Fae screwing with people.
That would make a certain amount of sense. I mean, because it's a lot easier in as much as if you're going to believe any of it, it seems to me it's a little easier to believe creatures from some sort of overlapping dimension that that occasionally slip in here and have been here forever, as opposed to guys that somehow manage to travel like 1,000,000 or 1,000 light years or whatever, just to come here and do these weird little things that make like no sense, and somehow only a few people ever see them. You know, it's always very like they're never spotted wide scale, and at this point, it's kind of hard to believe with all the crap and satellites we've got up there that something wouldn't pick up something, because then you have to get into the whole worldwide government conspiracy thing, and you can't get all the governments in the world to agree on anything, much less holding a secret like that. So I would honestly tend to believe the fairy thing quicker than the UFO thing.
Though to be fair, I do enjoy the fact that we had probably the tallest leprechaun in that particular episode, because it was the doctor from Voyager.
Oh, Robert Picardo.
Yes.
Fantastic actor. Also played one of the great werewolves of all time in The Howling.
I haven't seen The Howling.
Oh my God, you should. It's it created the standing werewolf looking, like the modern werewolf that we tend to think of that looks like a wolf but stands on two legs.
The bipedal.
That was the movie that first did it. Until then, it was all either Lon Chaney style Wolfman or wolves.
Or American Werewolf in London style.
Well, yeah, that was still pretty much a wolf. It was just kind of a hellhound wolf.
However, the transformation
and they
sequence
were done,
did win awards, like a great amount of awards, because after that was when they started moving into CGI, so nothing like that.
That and The Howling were done right around the same time, like within a year of each other.
Fair enough.
Also, The Howling it's a great old movie. The script is fantastic. All the characters in it are named after directors from the old Universal movies, like the old Universal werewolf movies.
Oh, kind of like when they redid House on Haunted Hill, they changed the millionaire's name to Price. That's a homage to Vincent Price.
They slipped in, but
he looked a lot like Vincent Price in that one, though.
Yeah, he did. That was deliberate.
I love that.
But yeah, The Howling has like lots of little homages and little callbacks to things. It's just a wonderful movie if you like werewolves and werewolf legends. It handles it better than most.
I'll take a look.
I have a copy. I can give it to you. But yeah, Robert Picardo, one of his early movies is playing a werewolf serial killer in that movie, nice. And he's fantastic. So yeah, I love him. He's a great actor. But as far as in American Gods, the leprechaun in that is also an extremely tall, red-haired, Irish guy who just likes to start fights and gets really offended if you start bringing up like traditional leprechaun, folklore stuff.
Actually, funnily enough, the whole Irish people all have red hair. No, that's not Irish, honey. That's typically more Scottish.
Yeah. People forget there was a lot of inbreeding. There was an entire clan of Scottish that moved and relocated to Ireland and started living there.
Some of it came in
Irish.
that way, but it was still far more prominent in Scotland back in the day.
Oh yeah. No, the red-haired Irish thing is more of just a trope, but they happen to get an actor that...
To be fair, when you hear somebody speak and they happen to have a brogue or a little whatever it is, most people, especially here in the States, can't tell the difference, so they automatically assume Irish and completely forget Scotland exists.
Which pisses the Scottish off to no end.
It made somebody... my mom... a couple years ago, she was working somewhere, and she was talking to one of the customers for the company she was working at. And after a few moments, she looks at him and she goes, "Scottish?" And he's like, "How could you tell?" She goes, "I know how to tell a brogue from a lilt."
Yeah.
And he was so happy.
Yeah. Well, it also doesn't help that in Ireland there are like several different accents, like even different parts of, there's like northern Dublin and southern Dublin, and they have completely different accents. And the one that people think of, the sort of Lucky Charms leprechaun sort of accent, almost doesn't exist there. It's like apparently a very small regional accent from, I think, Cork or Limerick, but it became popular or famous because of a particular actor in Hollywood, just like the Talk Like a Pirate all came from one actor. Well, one actor in a couple of pirate movies doing a really bad impression of an English accent from a certain region, and it turned into the pirate accent. Real pirates didn't talk like that.
Well, it also depends on where the pirate was from.
Yeah.
But-
Arr, matey.
Ay, Maron. That I know a couple of pieces of Gaelic, but the one that I particularly like using is not safe for radio.
Sure it is. Nobody will understand it except in Ireland.
There's a funny story that goes along with that phrase, which maybe as like a bonus thing, I'll tell that story. But there was actually something I was gonna say. Damn, what was it?
Welcome to Tangent Encyclopedia.
Pretty much. Because when we were, what were we about like certain actors were embodiments and whatnot. There's I'm an anime nerd as well as a crack addict, Craig. Which if you say that over in Ireland, it means you're having a bit of fun.
Yeah, crack. That's something. Yeah, crack.
Just be careful saying that to the police over here.
Yeah, it's spelled very differently. But yeah, crack is a term for fun.
There's an anime character that when they did the dubbing for, because of how his lips were moving, they had to have something that was very fast. And for some reason, there's this stereotype that all Irish people talk really, 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 really fast, which is not true, because I work with an Irish woman.
No, they're again, it's a regional thing. It's just like us with, you know, the difference between like sort of a Maine northeastern accent and like a southern accent. There are different regions in Ireland, and they sound very different.
My sister went to Oklahoma, spoke at a normal pace, and people in Oklahoma would say, "You need to." It's like, listen, Yank, you talk way too fast. I've gotten that numerous times over the phone on the few instances I'm talking to somebody from the U.S. At work. But
we actually do. Apparently, we have a certain in the Northeast, especially, and the cities and whatnot. It lends us to speaking more rapidly and with more intensity than in other places.
Well,
so
that could be an imprint
as,
of the the Industrial Revolution, because everything had to be fast paced.
Yeah.
That's a cultural thing.
And that's still the way it is. Everybody wants everything hurry up, whereas in other parts of the country, it's not so much like that.
As I was saying, so they gave this character a very fast pace, and because of how fast paced it was, and this was like normal speaking, mind you, his voice was a couple notes higher than you would normally expect it to be, especially when he was really, really rambunctious. And we had a friend of ours who was watching this particular series of episodes from the show for the first time. And to anybody who's curious, it is Yu Yu Hakusho during the Dark Tournament fighting Jin, when Yusuke's fighting Jin. And
No idea.
the amount of stereotypes that proceeded to fall out of my friend's mouth imitating this character was ridiculous. I'm sitting there going, I heard about it afterwards because he was watching with my sister, and I'm sitting there going, he was telling me about it afterwards, and it's like, you know, and he was playing on the whole, you know, Irish are alcoholics, which they're not, you know, and they love their potatoes, which is like, no, oh my God, stop, 10 guys to stop. But it's like, you know, these are the stereotypes that a lot of them are like stuck with, and especially if we go back to the Leprechaun. Everybody thinks of it as a tiny little green man all in green and whatnot. And it's like, he used to go around in a red coat, by the way, back in the day, and then over time he started switching back and forth, and then especially here in the States, it's clung to.
Well, a lot of things got you know, completely mutilated in the United States. Like a lot of our St. Patrick's Day customs are completely wrong. For instance, corned beef.
Corned beef and cabbage?
Yeah, more or less
potatoes.
unknown in Ireland.
Yeah,
They used to use bacon. They didn't have corned beef. It's a Jewish thing. They found it here in America.
Well, who ran the butcher shops when they came over here?
Yeah, exactly. Bacon was more expensive, you know, over here, so they started having to change it out and use the corned beef, which was not expensive. But
you know,
you go over to Ireland, you won't find corned beef and cabbage or anything like that.
I just find how, like on social media, every year, without fail, I will come across in some form or another, typically on Facebook. I'm wondering if I'm going to find any of it on Twitter this year, which that would be pretty awesome. There was a woman who's a bartender over in Ireland, and she goes on this rant about American tourists who they go, everybody's Irish on St. Patty's Day, no, this is about
Yeah.
our, and she like laid it out
Yeah.
about, you know, their independence and this, that, and the other thing. And granted, that would probably more apply to where you are in Ireland.
Yeah.
But since I think most of the...
Well, but it's like anything else. There's all this talk about cultural appropriation and stuff, and some of that St. Patrick's Day stuff really, you know, can get offensive if you really think about it and look at it. It is cultural appropriation. You're basically just, I mean, if we walked around and said, you know, hey, everybody's African American on Martin Luther King's birthday,
You'll
and we
get
started
dashed.
walking around, yeah, you'd get your ass kicked. So, you know, again, it's one of those things where it's something that needs to catch up. It's like certain things we still think it's okay to do it with. You know, Native Americans still get a bunch of their stuff, you know, taken for granted and jacked and appropriated.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not right. And it's really not right to do it, you know, with anybody, the Japanese, the Chinese, you know, any kind of culture.
Yeah, no, there was a...
You don't just try to take it and say, oh, it's...
Or it's the people
you know,
that
it's
are
ours.
who are not of that particular culture who are saying, oh, this person is culturally appropriating. Like, there was a thing not that long ago, and it actually keeps surfacing up on Facebook, where it shows a picture of a little girl who is dressed up in a kimono, has proper makeup on, to have a tea ceremony.
Yeah.
And this one chick goes off about how this is cultural appropriation, this is not okay, da 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 da.
Right.
Somebody who was actually Japanese said, are you kidding? She is properly immersing herself. This is what she's doing right. She's
Right.
5.
And that's...
She wanted a proper tea party.
And that's a big part of the argument,
you know,
and that's where I do take issue with other liberals, as you know, even being one. And I say, you know, you do have to look at it in context. If something's being done with respect, if you're participating in a culture's, you know, ceremony or traditions or whatever, you know, that's fine. There's no reason that, you know, you can't take part in something or you can't respect what some other culture does. Taking it now, wearing like the Halloween costume of like, you know, hey, look at me, I'm, you know,
a chief.
I'm the big brave Indian chief wearing like the feather headdress, and you're basically mixing things from like 5 different tribes and just calling yourself a generic Indian and running around going woo, 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 you know, which is...
They had to make up a 13th tribe that had nothing to do with the original tribes for Voyager, for Chakotay. They had to do that because the tribes actually got up in arms about it because they didn't want anything...
Well, they created this like South American tribe for him that, you know, didn't really exist.
They consulted with them about what would be okay with them ahead of time before him, but when they first found out what his background was supposed to be, they were furious. They also wouldn't let it be shown what his spirit animal was for that reason, which actually brings me to another point. There was something else that was going around trying to essentially police people's beliefs to some extent. It was about how some people go, oh, so-and-so, or this thing here, or this particular animal is my spirit animal in some aspects, meaning you're like channeling what that is. And that's how most people are utilizing it. But there are people that are getting up in arms about it.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And it's essentially, because I read one of the biggest rants about it, and it essentially boils down to, if you yourself did not from birth originate from that tribe in some aspect, you have no place using this. And I take issue with this on a very small basis. I'm pagan, and having connection to a particular type of spirit, whether it is animal, whether it's some sort of humanoid or anything like that.
Right,
you know,
and I would agree
I
with you.
understand
There
that
are
there's
a
a lot of people that are like, Chuck Norris is my spirit animal for like no other reason than, they have like the mighty neck beard. And
well,
it's like,
and again,
no.
and part of it is it's a meme. It's a social. It's become like spirit animal or whatever has become almost a slang for something that you identify with.
And it does.
And maybe
as a
that's
meme,
not
it does.
maybe that's not right, but you can't police everybody to the point where, because if you examine anything long enough, you can find something wrong with it. The question is really, it comes down to, for me, anyway, it comes down to intent. What is your intent with it? It's like are you mocking the culture or the place that originally came from? If so, then then you're
It's also
probably
great,
wrong. If not, if you're doing it from a place of respect and you're just using a term, I mean, because people borrow foreign terms to describe things all the time.
like chutzpah.
Chutzpah, yeah, it's like, are you not Jewish? You can't use that word. No, of course,
There are
you
people,
know, it's
and,
like
or
language
Yiddish and
borrows
things
from
like
each
that.
other.
Like,
Yeah.
Like the amount of words in Yiddish that are essentially meant for describing male genitalia
Yep.
is hilarious, and it's usually an insult to
Schmuck.
putz.
Wonderful word,
Yeah.
putz. Yeah.
But
some great terms
or
there.
even like my one sister, she is, like I was saying before, like she's she's as I mentioned beforehand, is a Hellenic priestess, has been one for 20 years. She is also Native American and everything like that. I broached this with her because we are both pagans, and she goes, and especially because the particular rant, I showed her that, and the way it was written was essentially white people stay out. It's like, no, that's not fair to anybody. And
yeah,
you know, and she uses
well,
it
any,
very
any
often.
sort of exclusionism, it usually doesn't work. It's like you should always look to try to include others in things rather than try to say, oh, well, this is ours, you can't have it. You know, it's like, as long as somebody respects what you have and what you are. Like, I'm Irish. You know, I'm Irish and Hungarian, and as I said, a number of other things. I'm the first one to laugh at, at some kind of, like jokes and things like that. And it's
Same here.
It doesn't bother me, because it's like, that's this idea of racial identity, for one, is mostly something that we've made up. It's, it doesn't really, race doesn't really have a scientific basis. There is no race of this and race of that. People have intermarried and invaded. And,
even in different pantheons. I mean,
all the stuff for
I guarantee you, if there was a pop quiz right now, and here's a pop quiz for everybody at home. What does Set from Egypt look like? No, seriously. What does Set from Egypt look like?
Gerard Butler.
That is hot as hell, but no.
What, you never saw Gods of Egypt?
I did not see Gods of Egypt.
Oh yeah,
I didn't
awesome.
have a chance to, but
it's the Egyptian pantheon played as Power Rangers. It's amazing. It's hilarious. It's
kind of like Troy was supposed to be like some weird. It was a complete flop in itself. Everybody hates that movie.
Troy was so sad. It could have been cool. They tried to take. They tried to do like.
They ruined a lot.
Well, they did the Iliad, and they tried to do it by taking all the gods out of it and making it like just some sort of realistic war movie, but they still failed. And
they failed on so many fronts, and it's just no. So to answer the question for what does Set look like? Set is pale with red hair and green eyes, which doesn't match most of the members there. And even up in the north, there's actually, I forget who it is, but there's a very prominent figure in, I think it's like Norse mythology, maybe Greece. I forget if it's like Greece or Norse, offhand, but
probably
they're fairly, well, no, even further north, because that kind of paleness wasn't normal in
because
Greece
what I was saying,
either.
the Greeks had a thing. People with red hair and pale skin and gray eyes were Virgolakos. They were vampires.
Well, yes, they did, but I was saying, I think it was like further north, and again, but it's like that person was very, very dark skinned, looked like nothing like the rest of the pantheon. So it's sort of like saying, oh well, keep your stuff here, keep your stuff there, and it's like
people,
no,
people
it
appropriated gods and change. I mean, even the Egyptians, what we think of as the classic Egyptian pantheon, really evolved from way back when Egypt was hundreds of separate little kingdoms, and eventually one would conquer the other, and another, and they would take those people's one god that was like their primary god and bring them in
to a degree too.
Most cultures did. I'm sure the Greek pantheon emerged as different places joined together and
I'm not sure what happened with the Romans, because they had the Etruscans, and then just suddenly out of nowhere, nope, we're taking everybody else's and we're leaving this behind. It's what?
The Romans kind of took the Greek gods and said, we like the idea, we're going to change all the names.
Like,
that was cultural appropriation on a massive scale.
And it's like, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Now, the Romans knew how to do cultural appropriation. Yeah.
Don't take after the Romans, kids. Parable of the day. They're a reason half of this. They're a good reason why faith is a big contention point for a lot of people, or at least the most prominent one.
Although the Romans, what have the Romans ever done for us? Indoor plumbing, the aqueducts. Yeah.
Well, such concepts were
government, road
there's actually
maintenance.
an interesting series on
Public
Netflix called Pyramid Riddle or something like that. I forget the name of it, and my sister's gonna smack me because she's told me like at least 5 times, and I actually need to start watching it. And it's going into alternate theories of why certain structures were built the way they were over in Egypt. Like the one pyramid was supposed to be in certain parts the way it's constructed. It looks like it's supposed to be part of something greater, and it was actually supposed to be some sort of energy conduit instead, and things like that.
There's so many theories about the pyramids, and then there's all the different pyramids that appeared in other structures, other cultures around the world, and people are like, oh, it's mystical and whatnot. No, it's also just a really efficient way for an ancient culture to sort of put, a building together that goes high.
Well, think of it this way: like the first settled peoples, if you look at some of their houses, they have such disproportionate everything. And then you get over to like Sumer and Babylon, and where Babylon is, and like the I forgot the word. Essentially, their pyramids.
Architecture.
Well, no, like those not only were like at the top, was that where the temples were, but it was also because that particular area at that time, this is before the Tigris and the Euphrates like shifted so sharply, and is practically dried up at this point. At least last I checked the map. I could be wrong. But before it shifted as far as it did, they would get flash floods out of nowhere. They had no way of predicting it. You're dealing with, very rudimentary technology. So whenever a flood was supposed to have come, especially when it came to rains and things like that, people would go up the, I want to say Zenith, but that's not it. But they would go up the Ziggurat, thank you. They would go up the Ziggurat in order to try to stay out from under the flood.
Yeah.
Because according to them, when there was random floods, that is when, the gods were saying, okay, we're going to clear out some of you because you're becoming too populous and you might overthrow us. No. Which that was always an interesting concept. The Sumerians have a very interesting place in history for the actual people.
I just realized it's now 7:34. So
is it?
On that note about pyramids, that concludes our episode on the Fae. And angels.
They go everywhere. Both groups.
Fairy pyramids. The
They have
fairies built the pyramids. There we go. It ties together.
All right, everybody.
All
This
right,
has been Paranormal Encyclopedia. For what it's worth.
I've been your temporary host, Brian McKinley, our wonderful producer.
Hey, have a good one, everybody.
All
Be
right.
safe.
Good
especially
night.
with the storm coming up.